that, it is time to welcome in Ben Baby, the Bengals beat reporter for ESPN.com, to help us break down and preview this Week 18 matchup.
Ben, are you excited about this meaningless game on Sunday?
Listen, we are all excited. I heard, if we get a little Myles Garrett action, I think that'd be a lot of fun. I think Trey Hendrickson will enjoy going up against Myles and competing against him in that way. I'm curious to see Jamar Chase has had a lot to say this season. Earlier in the year, he said that, he was going to break 100 receptions easy. Well, he's a little short of that. So is he going to try to play through that shoulder injury and really finish the year out strong? And you put up this number, between Myles Garrett and Trey Hendrickson. I think that's a great comparison. And you look at it, and, listening to y'all earlier, I firmly believe that Myles probably should be the defensive player of the year when you look at his numbers. At ESPN, we track a lot of different things, and I created something called a rush impacts, which essentially is how many sacks you create plus interceptions created plus incompletions created, which is all three separate metrics we track. And when you put them all together, Myles Garrett leads the NFL with 62 impact rushes that create a negative play in the passing game. His raw QBR, when he gets the first pressure, it's like 3.9%, completion percentage of around 30%. I think Trey's had a really good year. His opposing completion percentage when he gets pressure is a lot better than Myles's, but when you look at the raw numbers, Myles has had an incredible year. And Mike Hilton said it best a couple weeks ago, when the Bengals were getting ready to play Pittsburgh. This division, the AFC North, might have the three of the best pass rushers in the league when you look at Myles, when you look at TJ Watt, and when you look at Trey.
Myles is the best, and Trey Hendrickson's the most underrated pass rusher in the league, I think.
Yeah. I agree, but I also think that goes to, Trey's a more quiet guy. I think the reporters tried to get him yesterday in the locker room and to ask him about sacks, and he kind of shrugged that off. He doesn't want to talk about a lot of that stuff. And, I'll be honest, I think that does hurt him to a degree, and it does hurt your profile. And you go look at, guys, especially on the defensive side of the ball, a lot of times when you're doing really well, you're going unnoticed because you're staying, people are staying away from you. They're scheming away from you. And Trey does a lot of really good things. And I think that's part of maybe why he's been so underrated. And it doesn't also help that the Bengals have not been good this year, especially defensively.
Watt and Garrett have done it longer, though. They've been at the top of their games longer. Yeah. So I think that's why, if you compare him to the other two. But I think league-wide, I think he's got a lot of respect on his name this year.
Yeah, he's not as good as those guys. But I'm just saying, he's a top 6 or 7 pass rusher, and he doesn't ever get talked in that group.
I didn't realize he was in the same draft class as Myles and TJ Watt.
Yeah,
but he hasn't been Myles came out right away and made an impact.
No, the last 4 years, Hendrickson's sack numbers 13.5, 14, 8, and 17 this year. Before that, his first 3 seasons were minuscule. But the last 4 seasons, he's been
It don't matter. He's not in the same class as Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett, to me, is in a class by himself. I think Myles Garrett is a good deal better than TJ Watt. Is that unfair?
I think that is, I would go with that. Yes, I think Myles is definitely better than TJ. I do think, though, that Trey does deserve to be in that conversation. I think that he's just as disruptive, causes a ton of problems. I mean, he has 17 sacks on the season. He's not like he's not having a bad year. He's got 3 more sacks than Myles. I think that's, it's not the end all be all stat, but I'm pulling up the numbers right now. The opponent. So when Trey Hendrickson gets a first pressure, opposing quarterbacks have a completion percentage of 27.6%. That is a good number right there. When you look at some of the other top edge rushers in the league, you look at other just rushers in general. Aaron Donald, 35.5%. Myles, 38.2%. Trey is significantly lower in that regard. And so when he is getting pressure and he gets pressure at a high volume, he makes just as much of an impact as the other top players in the league. So, but I still do think, I want to be very clear, I think Myles definitely is at the top of that list, but Trey does belong in that conversation.
Ben, I've been, in my lab with a pen and a pad trying to get this label off. I'm looking at Tee Higgins, man. I mean, he would look real nice in that Browns uniform. I don't know what they can do.
Aren't they going to franchise tag him?
What they going to do with Tee Higgins?
I think that seems like, everything that we've heard so far. I wouldn't be shocked if they end up going that franchise tag route. I don't know if T would love it, but I think he would understand it's part of the business as well. But, the team was unable to get to a long-term deal with T, who was looking he views himself as a wide receiver one. And when you look at the numbers, it's hard to disagree with that. I think when he's been targeted heavily and when he's playing well, he's as good as the top receivers in this league. And we're going to see a record number of mock edits of him in different uniforms this offseason of teams hoping they get Tee Higgins. I joked during that game against Kansas City, at what point does Patrick Mahomes just walk across the field and just drag T and say, hey, you're with us now. We'll go ahead. We'll get you taken care of. I'm sick of throwing to these guys. I can't be throwing to MVS anymore. I'm going to throw you the ball, get you as many targets as you need. I think that, if they tag him and the Bengals look to trade him, there should be a lot of suitors for him. And when you look at what he's able to do, I think he is a great receiver and how he's good at getting separation. He's got really great feet for how big he is. I think that goes underrated. Everybody sees his frame, how long he is, how good he is in the air on contested catches. But when you watch him in practice at training camp and really get a look at him and look at his routes, I think that's where he's had the most growth. He's done a really good job. And talking to Bengals assistant coach Troy Walters, their receivers coach, he told me that when T came in, he was a little raw in that regard. And even T told me that was one of the biggest knocks on him coming out of the draft and probably why he fell to the second round. But when you watch him, the tape doesn't lie. He's a really good route runner. He does a great job of doing what you need him to do. And the fact that he came in and played in that game against Kansas City despite re-aggravating that left hamstring shows you what kind of competitor he is. So if I'm a team, I am trying to go get him and pair him with a quarterback because he's going to make that guy a whole lot better.
That touchdown he had 2 weeks ago was it was unbelievable.
Play.
The awareness, the ability to bend and get the ball over the goal line, it was nuts.
The stretch. Ben, when you look at the Cincinnati Bengals this season, obviously you guys had a bunch of injuries on your team. But when you look at the Cleveland Browns, they also had injuries on their team, and they're still able to make the playoffs. Has what Kevin Stefanski done this year eliminated the excuse that the injuries is not the reason why you can't make the postseason?
Yeah, and I think Zac Taylor deserves credit as well, and there are going to be a lot of questions. If the Bengals just packed it up and said, you know what, Joe Burrow's hurt, we know we're probably not going to win another game this year, and we're going to use that as an excuse, there would have been a lot of heat on that staff and for not getting it done, because this is still a roster that played for an AFC championship last year, back-to-back division titles. And you got to give that whole roster and that coaching staff a ton of credit that even after Burrow went down, they were still in the playoff hunt. And we've seen other teams over the course of this season, not be competitive once they've lost their starting quarterback and really played poorly. And I think, Kevin Stefanski's done a fantastic job this year. I think what he does schematically to help Joe Flacco out is great. I think the product that they've put on the field has been really, really impressive. And I've been really impressed every time we've seen Stefanski go up against the Bengals. He's obviously played very well against Cincinnati, and the Browns have played very well against Cincinnati. But I couldn't agree more that even if you lose a starting quarterback, you should still be good enough. Your roster should be good enough if you've built it the right way, if your locker room's built the right way, if you have the right culture, you should still be solid. You should still be competitive. And that's what we've seen from both of these teams. And that's why Cleveland has already locked up a playoff berth going into Week 18.
Ben, we were talking about the officiating and things they need to fix. In this Bengals-Chiefs game, there was just a ridiculous grounding call, intentional grounding on Jake Browning. It was a horrible call. And things like that just shouldn't happen. What did they say about that after the game?
It's funny. I asked Zach after, I believe it was yesterday. I said, is that something you're going to bring up? He goes, "What's the point? We're already out of the playoff race. We're going to submit our calls to the league. And a lot of times, and he's, coaches. I think when you talk to coaches in the league, I think the thing they want is just communication. They want to know why something is called. They may disagree with it, but a lot of times what coaches get really upset about is a lack of communication. And there are things that have been brought up that I've heard from various guys and in terms of how to bridge that gap. And I think that's the most frustrating thing, is that sometimes that level of communication just isn't there. And so, Zach obviously understood that, he said the guy that I was screaming at had the least amount to do with it. He was just on my sideline. Only one I could vent to was the guy on the other side of the field who made that call. But, I think as we move forward, there's definitely going to be a big spotlight on officiating. We saw what happened in the Detroit and Dallas game and over the course of the league. And I do want to say this, though, when people who are officials, they do want to get things right. I mean, it takes a certain type of person. I wrote a big series about this at the Dallas Morning News, profiled a high school crew, a college crew on a Friday and Saturday back-to-back. And a lot of these people, they understand what they're signing up for. And they have a certain personality type as well that, to want to be an official, A, you've got to really love the game, and B, you've got to really want to get things right all the time. Not everybody's really, fits both of those criteria. And so, it is unfortunate when things don't go well. These guys want to do well, but at the NFL, you've got to have the best of the best, and you've got to make sure that people aren't questioning, the integrity of the game to a large degree. I mean, I cover boxing. I know a lot of times I'll watch a fight and you're just sitting there praying that the judges don't screw it up. And that's a terrible feeling. The last thing you want to feel as a fan is that you enjoy the product on the field or whatever the event you're watching, and you're just hoping the officials don't screw it up. That's the worst feeling you could have. And that's a bad thing for a sport. And I think that's something the NFL really needs to consider as they move forward this offseason.
Ben, is there a difference between the way Browns fans feel about Deshaun Watson and his shoulder moving forward and the way the Bengals fans feel about Joe Burrow's multitude of injuries going into next year?
I don't know. It depends. How are Browns fans feeling, I should say, about Deshaun? Y'all got to tell me.
Well, listen, that topic we trying to bury it. We trying to wait till the off season. It just keep creeping back up. People have been hitting me up. I said, listen, I can't talk about that right now. You trying to get me in trouble. We just going to ride with Flacco for a little bit. But
there's nobody in Cincinnati saying they should stick with Jake Browning.
Yeah, right.
I'll tell you that.
And I don't think anybody in Cleveland is saying they should stick with Flacco. That's not realistic because of the price tag on the quarterback. But I think it's worth the question of bringing Flacco back as an insurance policy for next season.
But it's not an apples-to-apples comparison because Joe Burrow's been great in Cincinnati. Deshaun Watson hasn't. That's a big difference.
It's a lot of money, though. A lot of bread.
Yeah, but at a certain point, we saw this, in the college game. If you're committed to winning at a high level, sometimes you just got to figure out, you got to eat it and move forward and say, you know what, it didn't work, and we've got to move on. Saw Texas A&M where Mike and I used to hang around a little bit. They had to pay Jimbo Fisher a ton of money, and I thought they'd cook the books and find a way. Say, some booster's got a level 1 violation somewhere, and they said, no, we're going to be rich properly. We're just going to eat the bill and keep it moving. And at a certain point, the salary cap makes that a little more difficult. Yes, correct. Yeah.
Denver's doing it.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. If you understand, you're going to end up making more money. It's going to be cost prohibitive for maybe a couple of years, but at a certain point, you just have to make a decision and say, is it working or is it not? Now, as for Joe Flacco, I'm very curious to see what he looks like moving forward because several times a game he throws a ball that he has no business throwing, and sometimes he gets away with it, sometimes he won't. I think when I look at Cleveland as a whole, that's the biggest concern I have is that in a key moment, is Joe Flacco going to throw into triple coverage when he absolutely should not, like he has earlier this year. I think it might have been the Jets game, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember what team it was, but he threw a pick late in the fourth quarter, when the team, and Cleveland, I believe, ended up winning that game. But just watching back, I was like, that's a terrible interception. That's a terrible ball. I think that's the biggest concern I have with him is the windows that he pushes. So even if you do bring him back, I don't know how much of a viable solution long-term he would be. But you do need to figure out if you're Cleveland where you're at in this quarterback situation, especially this is a pretty good quarterback class. We'll see what happens. Can you find pieces to move? If you feel like you need to move up, what are the scenarios out there? But no, in Cincinnati, I think everybody is confident that Burrow can be, is the guy when they need him to be. I think it is a question, though, moving forward of his health and can he continue to stay healthy and can he kind of figure out how to manage his body as well. I think that's something that will come up this offseason.
Well, Ben, part of that process that you speak of, that they really are handcuffed. They can't move up. They don't even have a first-round pick. This is the third straight year that they don't have a first-round pick because of this trade. So it's not just the money. The money, Haslam's writing the check. Fans shouldn't care about that at all. The currency that really matters with fans is that they don't have the draft capital.
The discussion is after the 24 season.
Yeah, you got to at least go at least to the halfway point in my mind.
That would be it.
And if after year 3 you still have the same questions that we have now, then you're going to eat 2 large numbers. Denver's doing it with Russell Wilson. You just have to cut bait and say he's not our guy.
And if he plays great next year, then
that's right. He can fix all of it by playing great.
Yeah. Last thing, Ben, real quick. I'm just curious. Joe Mixon's gone, right? I mean, Chase Brown, they should be using – I actually think they've done a bad job not using him enough because he looks sensational.
Yeah, he's looked good in spots. I think that, when he had his moment, a couple weeks ago, he had a really good touchdown on a screenplay, lots of speed that he puts on the field. And his snap share last week, I thought it was a little low for what we would expect to see out of him. I will say this. I think Joe Mixon, he doesn't produce a ton of big plays, but I think he's had a really good year. I think that he's given them what they've needed in certain spots. He's been able to, I think the best way that it's described by the coaches, if you ask him to get 5 yards, he's going to get you 5 yards. If he's going to get you 4, he's going to get you 4. I think he's done a good job, especially over the last few weeks, being patient, been good in the screen game. He's been very productive in that regard. But with this Bengals offense, I think one of the big reasons it's been an issue for them is they don't have any explosive runs in the game. I think they need big plays in the ground game. I think that's what Chase Brown can potentially give you. He's just a faster back. You can feel a difference when he's on the field. And whether it's Chase Brown or somebody else, you've got to get that right, because the way that defenses play Cincinnati, they are daring them to run and give up big plays. And one thing that's been underrated this year, when you look at the Miami Dolphins, everyone talks about their receivers and that passing attack. They run the ball incredibly well. They gash people on the ground. You can go look at it. There's a reason Raheem Mostert's had a really strong year. Devon Achane has done great as well. And they do, teams are selling out to stop the pass, and you've got to punish them on the ground. And Cincinnati has not been able to do that enough. And, we'll see what happens with that moving forward. But I think that's the biggest issue with Mixon. He's not creating enough big plays in the run game, and that's what Cincinnati needs.
Thanks, Ben. Good stuff, man.
Thanks.
Happy New Year, Ben.
Yeah, Happy New Year's to y'all. Take care.